Good evening, everybody. It is good to see you. I have returned with the story of Helel to read y'all chapter 2. If you would like to follow along, check out my website where you can download the book for free and read with me at www.alanamcneil.com. I can put it in the description for you. Let's see. Today's my birthday, so I just ate a lot of cake and I'm a little out of breath because I'm super full. Anyways, it's been a good day. Truthfully. So, let's get started. Just gonna not waste any more time. So, chapter 2, the first judgment. After spending a full cycle of the sun in avid prayer, the guardians gathered and compiled their solutions. "I'll call a gale to blow their houses from the peak," Angelique said. "I'll split the mountain into two," Genesis declared. "Then I will call upon the boiling blood of the earth," Vlam grunted, intending to burn all remains. "I can solidify it with water, so that nothing may ever be recovered," Nero added. "I'll shine down on them, that they may see and know what befell them," Valgus chewed his fingernail. "I'll obscure their surroundings, so they may not see so much as their feet. Their escapes will be thwarted," Skoogie sighed. "And I shall take my sickle, and reap the evil from their hearts to store within my space, that it may never influence this world ever again," Helel said, unease gripping him. "This will be their first conquest." The Lord's sorrow was transmitted upon the guardians, but what they felt strongest was the Holy One's white-hot anger. The holiest of anger burned against these peoples. Their seeds of sin have too deeply taken root to be forgiven, and their hearts have been completely closed to the goodness of the Merciful One. A decision was made that they must exist no more, that their influence may not affect the remainder of his followers. They strode over to the village, a mix of emotions whirling within. Anger, sorrow, pity, and so many more fueled them to use their God-given powers to smite the evildoers. Small fires burned within the homes, the residents, and unawares of their fates. "Spare none," Nero concluded, a snarl in his voice. It was a fearsome power, the anger of the Complete One. It burned so greatly that even Helel wished for nothing more than to erase the life of each individual living within this village of pagans. To be on the receiving end of such fury from an ever-patient creator, he would never wish such a thing upon anyone. Valgus spun and took to the sky, brighter than any star. His light shone upon the entire village. Startled residents poked their heads outside of their doors. Some ran out and began to bow down to the light guardian, worshipping him as though he were one of their gods. Helel could see the discontent on Valgus's face. His mouth lifted into a snarl. Skoogie disappeared and his body encompassed even the mountain, leaving the village as a floating spectacle. Now, the people were growing increasingly skeptical. Some men were already adorned in tough leather gear, wielding axes and spears. They pointed them towards the new source of light, screaming profanities and threats. A gale ripped the weapons from their hands, and the ground beneath trembled. Helel marched directly into the center of town and was attacked by an onslaught of arrows, spears, and axes being thrown. Nothing touched him. They all disappeared into a gap, leaving the realm entirely. From what could be seen from within the mayhem, a temple rested in the center of the village, with morgues filled with skeletons on either side. Villagers were congregating there, brandishing long, skinning knives and yanking their young towards the sacrificial table. A grotesque, guttural rage churned within his stomach. They must exist no more. Helel closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel rather than see. This was not a sight which he wanted branded into his memories. He already knew that the lives of these humans would not be on their hands, for the Reigning One has spoken to each of the guardians, "Destroy the dwellings, and I shall turn the sinners to dust." Helel would have no hand in any destruction. He would only whisk away the evil souls before they could manifest elsewhere. Around him the wind grew, tugging at his hairs and threatening to rip his adornments away. He heard creaks and groans, and finally crashes as houses were torn from their foundations and thrown off the cliffside. The trembling ground deafened him as it split, sending statues of crumbling figures and their creations into a great chasm. He felt the heat of the hottest fires lava was called from the very mantle of the earth, burning the mountain itself. As Nero's tidal of water touched the molten rock, the steam singed Helel's hair and burned his skin to a tender red. I don't know where I got neck from. Burned his skin to a tender red. Finally, it was his turn. Helel stepped into his own realm and opened his eyes. Around him floated the blackened souls, darker than the void the world wandered in. The souls had been so tainted that there would be no way to return them to their former glory. No robes or wings would be granted to such specters. He constructed a long and curved scythe from his thoughts, and dragged it through the hundreds of souls, collecting them one by one. He then threw these into a cage of his father's holiness. It burned with the bars of the purest light. The screeches of the souls split his mind as though it were his sanity rather than the mountain that was broken in two. Physicality called for him, and the door opened. He swiftly left the tormented spirits to their imprisonment, and returned to the world where his fellows existed. His breath was haggard, and his muscles sore. Never before had he felt this meek. Genesis approached him just in time to lend her assistance. She was one of two guardians still standing on their feet. Vlam was carrying Angelique in one of his arms while supporting Skugi with his other. This was their first taste of the power they each held. "It is done," Valgus huffed, leaning his head on the boulder of hardened lava which he sat against. Helel finally gathered the strength to lift his head and study the work they had done. No trace of the village was left. All buildings had been taken into oblivion, and the people who lived there were no more. A film of dust was moving over the mountain as river water ran over stones. The unnerving feeling he had initially received upon resting his eyes on the village, which was now without existence, had dissolved and existed not. The smoky smell wafting from the fire-cooked fish inspired a greedy growl from his stomach. The guardians had been stationed next to the river which traveled from north to south. The river has many names: Rio de Viva, Life's Current, Putami Tistois, and many more which were already residing within his knowledge. This particular river was an important source of water for many, as it never stopped flowing and brought fresh water throughout the land. This was now providing use for the guardians, as it brought both water and food with it. Helel bit into the juicy meat of the fish, savoring the bite. It was far better than the berries he had eaten before, though there was far less flavor. He quickly polished off the fish's skeleton, then roasted another. The cycle repeated until he had consumed 7 fish. By then he concluded that he could eat no more. His strength was replenished and his stomach threatened to burst. "Let's go south," Angelique said, resting her head on a mossy log. "Okay," Genesis shrugged. No one asked any questions. It just seemed obvious that they go south. They didn't know why they needed to. It was just necessary. But before they began their travels again, it was decided they rest for the night, as the auburn sky was darkening to a deep plum purple, and the stars were beginning to glimmer down upon them. Helel waited until the others were settled, all huddled together to fight against the cold. Then he broke away and wandered into the dark, creature-filled woods. Proud oaks stood around him, twisting away and around each other. Their leaves blotted out the dark canvas beyond them, and their scent filled his nose with musk. Ever since he had entrapped the damned souls within his space, he had been itching to check on them. Not as a wellness visit, or even to see if they were still within the bars of holiness, but because he was compelled to touch them. It terrified him. For days, he'd been suppressing the urge to fly straight through the gap between realms and lock himself in the cage as well. And he finally was succumbing. He took a shaky step and recognized the feeling of passing through dimensions. The night of physicality didn't cross over, and everything around him was washed with a sourceless light. It was nowhere near the high-definition, pure light that came from the light in the darkness, the Creator. It was a dull, gray, foggy ambiance that illuminated his surroundings. Silence ensued, contrary to the screeches he had been subjected to upon the soul's imprisonment. The only sound was that of his trembling breaths. Where are they? His brows dipped as confusion tilted him. It must be where I left it, he remembered, thinking back to the mountain. Come to me, he ordered, and immediately the bars of power appeared, caging the raging souls blacker than the abyss. Helel shook with rage when he laid eyes upon the one seeking freedom. After everything you did, you still hope to escape? What have we done wrong? The voice sounded like thousands of men were speaking at once. What have you done wrong? He scoffed. How can you still not see what atrocities you have erected? Then tell us. How have we done any more wrong than you? What wrong have I done then? Compared to your idolatry and human sacrifice, what wrong have I done? You allowed us to be demolished. Yes, I did, and I would do it again, as it upholds the glory of the Father. Helel snarled, backstepping out of space and back into the physical realm. He burned with a ferocious fire. He was sure that not even Vlam's element could compare to the boiling blood which rushed through his veins. You shouldn't have seen them. They knew exactly what they did, yet feigned ignorance, and prodded him with mocking questions. It was already deep into the night hours. The moon was nearly blanketed by black, revealing only a sliver of its silver shine. The woods were almost silent, pardoning the creaks of oaks being pulled by drafts. It wasn't impossible to see, but it proved difficult to find the rest of the guardians. He had yet to find them when his wrist was grabbed by a quick hand. Helel jumped out of his skin and nearly flung himself into another realm as Skookie whispered, I found you. A breath of relief pushed its way out of his lips, and the tension left him. Skookie, it's only you. What were you doing? The shadow guardian asked, still holding onto his wrist. Walking. It's quite peaceful, isn't it? Despite not being able to see the man's features clearly, his startling violet eyes were undoubtedly shining. He might not have been able to see Skookie, but the man could see him. Come with me. They walked even deeper into the woods, further than Helel had gone. Skookie stopped and then turned, sitting in front of him. Sit. He did so, shifting uncomfortably. He hadn't a clue as of why Skookie had brought him here. Did I do something? No, but I'm afraid you might, he responded, not bothering to hide his doubts. What makes you say so? I can see it in your eyes, Helel. It's been clear for a while. They're nearly crazed with hunger, curiosity even. It's been several days already. We must move on and leave those memories in the past. Yes, I understand. I brought you here because I want you to tell me everything. Hide nothing, because doing so could jeopardize our mission. What has been pulling you away from the Father's beckonings? And why? Why are you wandering around alone when no one is awake and aware of it? Clearly, you aren't enjoying the tranquility of the quiet woods. You can't hide it when your entire presence vanishes. You underestimate the sensitivity we each hold towards each other. Helel couldn't bring himself to respond. His fellow was right. He was being strung away by a dangerous curiosity towards the darkened souls. He choked. Wanted to see the souls. Skookie nodded, like it was what he had expected to hear. Heed my warning, Helel, for I speak on behalf of the Guardians and our Heavenly Father. Do not become enamored by fleeting fantasies and empty promises. You know full well what can happen if you grow too close to evil and begin identifying yourself as such. You were there when we wreaked havoc upon those who turned away from the merciful one. You witnessed his powerful. Do not stray. His shoulders dropped as realization gripped his consciousness. He wasn't following his clear path. His feet were reaching for the right and left of it. And eventually, if this continued, he would be facing the completely opposite direction. Control your desires, friend, for they will bring about your own destruction in the end, Skooky added, reaching forward and squeezing his shoulder. Helel grimaced, not from physical pain, but from the scolding he received. Yes. And that concludes chapter 2. It's been a while since I've read it, so it's kind of like, man, I'm getting a little refresher myself. It's really nice. Like, I always think back on this book and I'm like, it's not my best work, and no, it's not. But man, it reminds me just how much I like the story. I don't know, it's exciting. It's cool because I kind of get to experience it all over again. Anyways, if you want to continue listening to these chapter read-throughs, come back and there will probably be another chapter posted. I'm not sure when. It's not on any sort of schedule. I'm just doing it when I can. I already have the prologue and chapter 1 up, so you'll be able to find those pretty easily. And yeah, that's it. If there are any questions, let me know. I can always answer them in the meantime. But yeah, that's that. I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for listening, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed. And if it's not your cup of tea, I always say this, it's not your cup of tea, and that's fine. You can find something else that you like. Maybe one day I'll write something that is your cup of tea. You could just come back then. We'll see. You never know what the future holds. So, I will see you next time. Thanks for sticking around. Good night.